Is there really a movement for 18 months of rolling lockdowns? We'll talk about that and how it's described as a long, hard road ahead by some. Plus, the governor of Texas is talking about reopening. What about other states? And also, was COVID-19 possibly here in December? Los Angeles Times weighs in on that one. Joe Biden's sexual assault allegation finally gets some treatment in the media. And Carol Baskin says she's been betrayed. That and more coming up.
I think it's going to be the toughest decision that I've ever made. Hopefully that I ever will have to make, but it's certainly the toughest decision that I've ever made. And I hope that I'm going to make the right decision. I'll be basing it on a lot of very smart people, a lot of professionals, doctors, and business leaders. There are a lot of things that go into a decision like that, and it's going to be based on a lot of facts and a lot of instinct also. Whether we like it or not, there is a certain instinct to it. But we have to get our country back. People want to get back. They want to get back to work. We have to bring our country back. And so I'll be making a decision reasonably soon. We're setting up a council now of some of the most distinguished leaders in virtually every field, including politics and business and medical. And we'll be making that decision fairly soon.
Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everyone. The president telling us that it will be the hardest decision that he has ever made, deciding whether or not we will have a reopened economy. How soon that will happen. We know that this is an inevitable discussion. We understand that there's a time limit on how long we can go in this current lockdown, but no one has yet been willing to really declare what that will be. Dr. Fauci and others are out there saying that this is a circumstance that we can't really know right now how it will end up because the virus gets a say. And to this, I say, well, what about the fact that we all understand that this cannot be the current state of lockdown will become economically catastrophic? I have not heard a single person who knows anything about anything who does not agree with that, at least in theory, does not agree with that basic statement that eventually the lockdown will become just too onerous, too problematic, and too destructive to the economy. People will stop obeying. People will non-comply, millions and millions of them. And you will have, if there are efforts by the state to force compliance, civil unrest, which is a polite way of saying violence and riots in the streets. You will have that at some point. I'm not saying it's going to be this week, next month. Maybe we could do this. I don't know. I don't like to say things even like maybe we could do this until September. Maybe we could, because I don't know. Nobody really knows. No one knows. And so we find ourselves trying to make a case when one side of the argument just wants to yell and shriek about how if you even care about the economy right now, you're some kind of monster, you're a bad person. Meanwhile, there's a growing understanding, I think, within the medical community that, or at least some members of the medical community, that this cannot stand as is. Steps to reopen, right? The basic early stage, not return to normalcy, but putting us on a pathway to economic activity. Normal's not going to happen until we have a treatment or a vaccine. That's when normal comes back. Otherwise, what we have at a minimum, a best case scenario, is this becomes, without those two things, is that we manage to suppress this to the point where we can go about our day-to-day lives, but it's still hovering in the background, and we still always have this concern that it will come back, that there will be spikes, there'll be additional cases. Dr. Fauci has pointed out that perhaps next month we will be in a position to take some of those steps to reopen. Play 6.
I believe that if we have a good, measured way of rolling into this steps towards normality, that we hope by the time we get to November, that we'll be able to do it in a way which is the standard way. However, and I don't want to be the pessimistic person, there is always the possibility as we get into next fall and the beginning of early winter, that we could see a rebound. And hopefully, what we've gone through now and the capability that we have for much, much better testing capability, much, much better surveillance capability, and the ability to respond with countermeasures, with drugs that work, that it will be an entirely different ballgame. So number one, I hope we don't have a rebound that would make this very difficult as we get into November. But if we do, and there certainly is a possibility, I'm a realist, it certainly is a possibility, hopefully we'll be able to respond to that rebound in a much more effective way than what we're seeing now in January, February, March.
Now, I find that general line of analysis to be this is reasonable, right? He's saying we'll take some steps. We could have a rebound. And, I know Dr. Fauci's become very political for a lot of people, and I'll get into why in a moment, given some of the statements he's made. But I do think that the guy really is, he's in a very difficult position. He's in a very difficult position. You have to understand his incentives are just for maximum lockdown and saving as many lives as is possible through policy, irrespective of what the economy does. The economy is not his purview. The economy is not his area. And just mental health and the child abuse and the spousal abuse and the divorces and the drug abuse and all the things that we're already seeing the early indicators are direct results, not correlated with direct results of this lockdown situation. That's not really Dr. Fauci's area either, right? So this is if you go to somebody, if you sit down with a doctor of climatology, with someone who's a PhD in climatology, for example, and you ask them what's the most important thing in the world, they're going to tell you climate change. And if you say, what should we be willing to do to fight against climate change, they'll say anything. And that's because that's their area. That's what they focus on. And anything other than that is going to open them up to accusations of not taking the issue seriously enough. It's risk that they don't need to have, right? So I'm just trying to establish for us as we talk about this, because this is going to be the conversation for the weeks ahead. When to reopen, how much to reopen, where to reopen. Let's establish that the public health epidemiologists, the various experts that we look to, they have a very clear way of looking at this issue, and also they have individual and professional incentives for this. And I'm not saying that's necessarily, in this case, a bad thing. I mean, wanting to save lives is obviously an honorable thing. But wanting to save lives is going to be all that we hear from people who are also making decisions that directly affect the economy, which is also about lives and health and the future. The economy is not the stock market. This is the stupid bad faith argument that you hear from so many people who just want to shut this down. But we also need to be prepared for being told that while they understand we can't do this forever, we're basically going to keep doing this and doing this and doing this until there's a movement to stop it. And that's what I think we're heading toward. I don't think that there's going to be an agreement on this. I don't think that you're going to see President Trump come out in May and say, I'm going to leave this to states to reopen, and then the media is going to be accepting of what happens. Because remember, if Trump leaves it to the states, that is the proper constitutional and respectful of federalism approach. But if Trump leaves it to the states, how can they blame Trump when one state opens up and, let's say, has a resurgence of cases? Well, that was the governor's decision. That was left to the states. They don't want that to be the case. They want to make sure that it's going to be Trump's fault. So there won't be an acceptance of that framework from the media, that some places can open and other places can't. They're going to say that there should be a national lockdown. This is what Pelosi and others have been pushing for. There needs to be a national level lockdown, and any deviation from that from the president is wrong. Any deviation from that, blood is on his hands. That's what you'll hear. That is inevitably where this whole thing is going. So also keep in mind that when we're talking about the election, Dr. Fauci is saying, hopefully we'll be able to vote normally. So you can see that that's going to be quite a debate, too. Play clip 5.
I think it could probably start, at least in some ways, maybe next month. And again, Jake, it's so difficult to make those kinds of predictions because they always get thrown back at you if it doesn't happen. Not by you, but, by any of a number of people. We are hoping that at the end of the month, we could look around and say, okay, is there any element here that we can safely and cautiously start pulling back on? If so, do it. If not, then just continue to hunker down.
Continue to hunker down. How long are we going to be told to continue to hunker down? At what point does everyone start to recognize that that's just crazy? There is a point at which it's crazy, and it doesn't matter what the epidemiologists say. Maybe it's a year. Maybe it's 18 months. I don't know. Maybe it's 2 years. We don't necessarily have a vaccine in 18 months. That's best case scenario. 2 years, 3 years. I know you're starting to say, Buck, this is completely insane. Exactly. But we're being told hunker down. As long as it takes. As long as it takes. Nope. There is going to be a pushback on this. There's going to be a backlash on this. It will be extreme as time goes by. People will recognize that there is more, in fact, at stake here than merely the best possible practices to contain a virus that we're not even sure are the best practices. They keep telling us this, but I'd like to see more data about what the reality of the change in transmission is as a result of lockdown of business versus social distancing at home, better hygiene, protection for those who are at particularly high risk. And also until we have serology tests to show us how far and wide the infection spread and how soon it was here, this is a lot of guesswork. Anyone who's telling you otherwise, I mean, the lockdown is the just extreme. It's the nuclear option. We have done the nuclear option against this virus, and we don't even know a lot of things about it that you would want to know before you would take that option. So remember that, too. There are scenarios in which new information comes along here that shows us that this was a one-size-fits-all approach that was not the right move. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but it's certainly possible. Meanwhile, we're being told, maybe you just kind of keep locking down. No, eventually we're going to start unlocking. One way or the other. I mean, the government can either be on board for this or not, but people are going to non-comply. This weekend was Easter for Christians. I know it's the Passover season for our Jewish brothers and sisters. It's Easter for those of us who are Christians. And it was a pretty remarkable, unsettling, and difficult thing to hear that there were not just church services shut down, of course, but I understand why that's happening, but that the state was threatening to jail people who didn't just go to church, but did things to try and maintain social distancing while also practicing their faith. A drive-in church, for example, where everyone stays in their car, that being shut down. Well, you're going to infect people through the glass of the window of your car if your cars are all closed? What exactly is the... you keep seeing this. The overreach by the state is getting stronger and stronger, and the justifications for the experts telling us what to do are not getting stronger. In fact, there are more questions as time goes on, not only about how they completely missed the preparation for this, missed the early warnings that we should have had, and I'm talking about the experts now, but also that along the way we've been told to do some things that are wrong. And there's a lot here that we still have to know before we can understand how to weigh the options they're giving us right now. Lockdown forever is not possible. Reopening has to happen at some point. There will be risks to reopening, but the risks from never opening are absolute. And I think we're starting to understand that better as a country. At least some of us are.
So these estimates or predictions of a V-shaped economy, that the economy is just going to turn right back on when people go back to work, is overly optimistic.
I think so. It would be wonderful if some new therapy were developed in the next couple months, that people could have confidence to go back to work, that they could get treatment. Then potentially we would have a V-shaped recovery. But barring some healthcare miracle like that, it seems like we're going to have various phases of rolling flare-ups, as we heard from your guest from Washington, different parts of the economy turning back on, maybe turning back off again. This could be a long hard road that we have ahead of us until we get to either an effective therapy or a vaccine. It's hard for me to see a V-shaped recovery under that scenario.
A long, hard road. That was Neil Kashkari, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. A long, hard road and no V-shaped recovery. Right now, people look at the stock market and they're thinking, okay, things can't be that bad. The market has rallied up. The Dow's up a few thousand points from its low, and it seems like it's stabilized for right now. We have to understand that there are a lot of people who have been betting on the infusion of cash from the government and that this wouldn't last that long. Once we start to get closer to the recognition that that cash infusion from the government, as massive as it is, trillions of dollars, is not enough. Once we get to that point, once we get to the phase where we recognize what the real damage is here and how long it's going to take to unwind, that's when I really worry about the economic implications. And I think that will be reflected very differently in the market. Remember, right now, the Treasury yields, bond yields are very, very low. So people out there who are speculators, people who want to make money, they have to put money into the stock market. And there's a very ingrained in investors' sentiment. You know, this is like investing 101. You know, buy the dip. When everyone else is fearful, you get greedy. When everyone else is greedy, you get fearful. These are the mantras of the market. And right now, people are obviously fearful. So there are some folks out there who are looking to capitalize on that. And by the way, that's a good thing. We want people investing their money in companies right now. We want those stocks to stabilize. That's important for jobs. There's a lot that goes on with the stock market that's not about people trying to, pad their own bank accounts excessively. Is there such a thing as excessively? We could talk about that another time. But for right now, there's this complacency, I think, about this. There's a complacency that all that has to happen is we'll reach this point and they'll say business is turned back on, and it's like none of this will have ever happened. Everyone will go back to their jobs. Businesses will reopen. That's not going to happen. There is a loss of productivity, a loss of productive behavior, a loss of wealth in real terms that has occurred here. Trillions of dollars of wealth has evaporated globally, and trillions, I can't tell you how many, are in the process of evaporating from the U.S. economy. That's happening right now. We've bought ourselves some time for this, but if we wait to see the worst effects here of the economic slowdown, it'll be far too late and we won't be able to avoid them, right? We'll be suffering from them. And that's what I think needs to be understood much more so than what we're currently seeing from this conversation. In fact, there's still a very powerful movement out there among media and among elected officials and among generally left. It's interesting, isn't it? There's a partisan divide here somehow. There are conservatives I know who also believe in maximum shutdown. So I want to be clear that this is not entirely partisan. But generally, leftists want shut it down, shut it all down. Government writes the checks for as long as needed. And conservatives are saying, can we start to go back to business? Why is that ideological divide so apparent? It's a question worth asking.
The New York Times reported yesterday that you and other top officials wanted to recommend social and physical distancing guidelines to President Trump as far back as the third week of February. But the administration didn't announce such guidelines to the American public until March 16th, almost a month later. Why?
Jake, as I've said many times, we look at it from a pure health standpoint. We make a recommendation. Often the recommendation is taken. Sometimes it's not. But it is what it is. We are where we are right now.
Do you think lives could have been saved if social distancing, physical distancing, stay-at-home measures had started third week of February instead of mid-March?
Jake, again, it's the what would have, what could have. It's very difficult to go back and say that. I mean, obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had right from the very beginning shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
Notice the thread here, the way that this is teed up by fake Tapper himself. in many ways, a master of fake news and among the biggest frauds in the entire business. At least some of the other libs out there admit that they're huge libs and they're pushing an agenda. He still pretends that he's just a journalist, man. So he establishes that the president did not move as soon as some of his advisors thought maybe he should move. And then just asking a neutral question here, could that have meant that lives were lost? And I'm just waiting. When do we just start hearing people say, well, is there blood on Trump's hands? Just ask the epidemiologist this. Here's another way to go. And you see, this is constructing a narrative, because what's not asked in that question is, would there have been outrage if Trump had wanted to institute measures before the public was as aware of what the threat was from this? Well, we have been told that Trump was a tyrant, that Trump was a dictator. Oh, my gosh, he's seizing power. He's shutting things down. He's not going to allow there to be an election. Crazy stuff like that. Does anyone really want to pretend that would not have been the claim made if Trump had said, shut it down, shut it all down in February? Saying that it took him a month to do it. Let's understand that, they really needed to shut it down. And this is where we get to we'll get to this conversation about how long the disease was in this country. They really needed to shut it down in January, right? They needed to shut it down right away, which nobody was doing. And in fact, the public health authorities that we rely on to keep us safe from exactly this. This is their, that phrase, you had one job. CDC, NIH, Fauci and company, various city health authorities. Garcetti out in Los Angeles, who's now Mr. Snitch on your neighbor, will for getting some sunshine and will give you a reward. Garcetti, just like de Blasio here in New York, had public health authorities out there telling everybody, what you're doing is great. Get out there. Go to the Wuhan Strong Festival in Chinatown here in New York. Go do that. Garcetti's people were saying the same thing. Go out there. It's fine. Chinese Lunar New Year, no problem. And they believe that Los Angeles' outbreak of this, which has been smaller so far, but the West Coast's outbreak of this was directly from China. So people are just getting off a plane from China. We keep getting told now that ours came from Italy. All that means is that Chinese visitors to Italy infected Italians and other Europeans, and then they came here to this country, or our people visiting Italy got it there. That's all that means. But, oh no, maybe we should call it, the Milan virus or something. I've heard some stupidity like that over the weekend. Completely absurd, but that's where we are, unfortunately. A lot of very stupid commentary around this. But yeah, you could always say that lives could have been saved. I would also point out that if we shut down the country this is a fact, and people are going to say this is absurd. If we shut down the country for 2 months every year during flu season, no question, we would save thousands of lives from the flu. Thousands of lives. That's just, does anyone want to take the other side of that? If social distancing works the way we're told that it does, even if just enhanced hygiene matters, right? But social distancing and lockdowns for the flu would save, and not just a couple thousand. I mean, they'd probably save 20, 30,000 lives if you did it, let's say January, February every year. Just have the government send us a check. Send everyone a check for January, February. Whatever you're making, the government sends you that for those months. Keep it on lockdown. Doesn't every life matter? Why won't we take every step to save every life? You can do the same thing that you're starting to see happen now. No, it's about what is reasonable risk and what is reasonable mitigation. And this discussion is going to get very ugly because there is a lot of death. There is a lot of suffering out there, certainly here in New York and New Jersey, but in other cities across the country, too. But there are also people who not only, put aside the left and how they want to make sure that all the Planned Parenthoods are running, all the infants, abattoirs for infants are going during this whole process. Got to make sure that's happening. But there are people who do just want to protect life, and I understand that, and that's obviously a very valid argument. But there are also people that are pretending how much they care about protecting life because they also view this as a huge opportunity politically, the same way they pretended to care about troops getting killed in Iraq on the left when that was just a weapon to bludgeon the Bush administration with. Because the moment that the deaths were happening under Obama in Afghanistan, they didn't care. Anti-war left disappeared. Does someone else want to try to find an explanation for me for why that was the case? We all know. This is why, I hate fake principles and moralizing from frauds and people that don't really care about their fellow human beings, but just drape themselves in so much concern about their fellow human beings. Now, I'm not saying that there are a lot of people that are just worried about this, and I think it's a majority of them, and I get that. And they, in the most basic human way, just want to protect life, and I respect that. But there is a strong contingent as well of people who it's really just about an opportunity to bash Trump and keep the government shut down. I don't think they're up late at night worried about how many cases of COVID-19 are going bad on any given day. I think that there's certainly a contingent for whom that is the case. And they're very loud. They're very loud on Twitter. They're very loud in other places, too. But that's why that whole Tapper thing, well, could lives have been saved sooner? And Fauci's like, yeah, of course, you could always say that. But, then the question that you have to follow, if you're a real journalist, you'd have to say, well, didn't you have an obligation to make that? If it's about saving lives, didn't Dr. Fauci and others have the obligation to tell everybody, to make noise, not just to tell the president, but to go out there and make a statement that this is what they see, this is what they believe? And then isn't there blood on the hands of the experts who are supposed to be protecting us? If we're going to play the blood on the hands game, which I don't think we should be doing, but this is what keeps happening, then what about the people that their only job was to protect us from this? And they got it wrong. Capital W, wrong. Oh, they knew a little bit before Trump did. They knew a little bit before, a few weeks before he took the steps to lock things down. We still don't even know how long this has even been in the country, but they want to say there's blood on his hands. And let me also just note that the explanation that we're going to get from so many people of Trump's culpability here is just going to, in the most disgraceful and dishonest way possible, it's just going to ignore that European countries, sophisticated, socialized medicine, European countries are getting crushed by this right now. Their health systems are in worse shape than ours. And to do the numbers to numbers comparison, you know what the real comparison should be if we're going to do an honest comparison of fatalities, it should be fatalities in the United States versus fatalities in aggregate in the Eurozone. That would give you a real sense. That population-wise is close enough. I think the Eurozone probably has about 500 million people, and America has 330. But to compare 330 million person America, as the media keeps doing, with Italy, Italy has 60 million people. We're 5 times the size of Italy. So why is it so noteworthy that we have only, by the way, slightly more deaths in this country than Italy does? If we're going to start talking about this in terms of the numbers, then we should at least know what numbers we're talking about. I think that's fair. But I'm also concerned that we're going to keep getting this line about how you can't have the conversation now about reopening. Just take that shutdown and just accept it. Take that shutdown and don't say a word. Shut your mouth during the shutdown, they say. Here is Governor Cuomo, who... You want to talk about blood on hands? Yeah, he gave some good press conferences, but the further I've been digging into what he did in the months leading up to this, very bad. No preparation, no foresight. If Trump is guilty of any lack of anything here, Cuomo's even more guilty because he's the one presiding over New York. This is his backyard. This is what he's supposed to take care of. We got hit harder than anybody else. So now here's the way that Cuomo talks about this. Play 11.
Keep politics out of it. Focus on government and focus on policy and keep politics out of it. It's very hard, especially at this time. And you start to hear this dialogue on reopening, and you start to hear people with political theories on whether we should reopen faster, whether we should reopen sooner, why are people against reopening, why are people in favor of reopening. That is corrosive and destructive, and if we don't stop it, it will feed on itself. There are no political conspiracies here.
But there's no shortage of politics. There's no shortage of political implications for this. And I don't just mean partisan political implications. I mean our relationship to the state, both in terms of the 50 states and then also the big S state, the sovereign, the Leviathan. The changes in the way that we're supposed to interact with our elected officials and with the agencies that operate at their direction. These are remarkable things. These are not small things. And I will talk to you about how people have started to, even on the left, recognize that we are living in what is effectively feeling like right now a benevolent authoritarian state. Now, whether you think it's benevolent or not, put that aside. It's trying to be, and it is. They are. Let's not get crazy. The public health authorities and the people running the states and everybody, they're the overwhelming, not just majority, but almost all of them are doing almost all of what they're doing because they think that it's going to help people. So we're not going to stray into crazy town where this is like they're leading us off into FEMA camps or something. I'm just saying, though, that they're still establishing a precedent and they're still taking upon themselves authority to do things that they don't really constitutionally have a right to do. And even if they're doing it for our benefit this time, there are longer term problems that raises. There are problems. And also, I think in the next 6 months, if this were to continue, we'll start to see more and more of that. But we have to have a debate about this. And there will be a political component to it. There's no question about it, especially with an election coming up this fall. So be prepared for a lot of people to tell you to stop being political while they are giving absolutely partisan political lectures in the same sentence, in the same breath. They'll be telling you, don't make this political. Do what I say. Trump is terrible. He has blood on his hands. Now shut up and go into lockdown. That's what we're going to be seeing.
What we're seeing is we're united in social distancing, and that's been very encouraging to all of us, and it should be encouraging to the healthcare providers that are on the front line, many of which are serving our Americans with such dignity and respect and ensuring that everybody gets optimal care. And as the president noted, our mortality in the United States is significantly less than many of the other countries when you correct them for our population. And that is really solely the work of our frontline healthcare providers. And so working with, you can really, hopefully you get the theme today that we are incredibly proud of our public health leaders at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, who are working together to really change the course of this pandemic, working with their citizens and their communities to make these changes, and the American public who have really taken all of this to heart.
Dr. Birx seems to me to be a reasonable voice on most of these issues. I haven't heard her be unreasonable, so I'd say a reasonable voice, period. It doesn't mean that she's right on everything, but at least I don't see her I don't see her deciding that she's going to do anything that's overtly political. That's my sense of it, right? I haven't gotten that from anything she said. She does point out here exactly what I was telling you, that the mortality rates, first of all, the overall number is worthless when you're comparing countries that are a fraction of the size of the United States to the United States. And another long-term component of this is going to be, and here's a prediction that I'm confident in. You'll see that while we have been told for particularly the last 10 years, that we've been told that the European countries have better healthcare than we do. We always hear this. European countries have the better healthcare system, and everyone has it, and it's free, and they figured it all out. You're going to see when they compare apples to apples here of individuals roughly the same age, roughly the same condition, going into a hospital. What are the chances if you went into a hospital in Italy or Spain that you survive with COVID-19 as somebody, remember, adjusted for age, because we know how important a category that is. If you're 65 and over and you go into a hospital in Spain or Italy, what are the chances of survival versus if you're 65 or over going to a hospital in the United States? I think that we will see that our system here is notably stronger, better. And this has been true about cancer for a long time, that our long-term cancer survival rates are much better than our European counterparts, with the possible exception of like Switzerland, a couple of small, ultra-wealthy countries. But in general, large Eurozone countries have a lesser cancer survival rate, particularly beyond 5 years, which is the marker they generally use in cancer studies. We're stronger than they are on that issue. And I think we're going to see we're much stronger on COVID-19 too. So that's a longer term issue, but I just think that the people that are constantly trashing the economy and trashing capitalism and saying that, we should have, if we had health care, Medicare for all, everything would be better. No, what they're going to find out is because we have doctors who are well paid and who efficiency is rewarded in our medical system at some level, meaning good care, when I say efficiency, is rewarded. It's not just you get paid the same no matter what, it doesn't matter, that will have the effect of actually saving lives here in the aggregate. When you look at all the cases together, that having a better funded and more market-based, not free market at all, but more market-based healthcare system than some of our European counterparts. I'm telling you, you're gonna see studies. They're gonna come out. It's gonna take a few years, but just mark my words, and they'll show that if you have COVID-19, you'd much rather be in an American hospital than anywhere in the Eurozone right now. That's for sure.